Hi everyone. Today my guest is Laïla von Alvensleben, joining us from Switzerland. Laila was the head of culture and collaboration at Mural, once a hot startup unicorn. And if you remember Mural, you've been in tech for long enough. Laila is a huge enthusiast of future of work and flexible work. She helps companies embrace, set up, and improve work styles and culture. She has a lot to share with us today about future of work, and let's go. So, Laila, since most of your work is related to work, I would like to start with a personal question that's related to your work, right? So, let's say you start your day in the morning, you make your coffee, you have your breakfast, and then now you are ready to start your work. And what do you do first? Like, how do you start like a usual work day?
Well, the first thing I look at usually is my calendar, and I usually look at it on my phone already in the morning before having breakfast, just to make sure that I know which meetings are coming up. And also, sometimes people book me, while I'm sleeping, and then I just want to make sure that I'm not missing my first meeting in the morning. So I'll
Yeah.
look at my calendar and then usually open Slack. So I do like email, Slack, LinkedIn. I'll look through all of those, and then I focus on the two or three main tasks that I have to do for that day.
So it's, I assume my understanding is you go into have a glimpse idea of what your communication is, where everything is, and then you go into work, right? So
Exactly.
is there anything that you avoid doing in your first few hours of your work, like, specifically?
Not really avoid. I guess I try to avoid getting distracted by emails or newsletters or things like that I don't need to look at or respond to. So I just,
Hmm.
even if I check my email, I have a separate inbox for any kind of newsletters or ads or things like that. And I only look at those at the end of the week in one go. And then even with the emails, I only respond to the ones that need an immediate reply. So that's what I avoid. It's just like I avoid wasting my time on things that I know I can get sucked into those and just
Yeah.
procrastinate. It makes me procrastinate from the actual work I have to do.
It's true. Like it's so easy to get sucked in early, and then it's waste away. Let
Yeah.
your energy go in that area. So, do you schedule calls in your early hours? Do you want to go give your best energy for a call, or like do you make sure it's in the afternoon hours? People have different
Yeah.
preferences.
This is actually my best time. You've got me at my best time. It's after lunch.
Nice.
So
Oh,
I
nice.
know, yeah, I try to keep my mornings free because I'm not a morning person. Like
Mm-hmm.
mentally, it takes me a while to wake up. So,
Yeah.
of course, I have some clients, maybe due to time zones or other reasons, we meet maybe weekly in the morning, and I know that is happening at that time. But I try to, for example, I use Calendly for people to be able to schedule calls with me,
Yeah.
and those are only open Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons. So I try to have those two dedicated afternoons to meetings. Of course, the reality is that I have meetings in different days, different times, but at least if it's like things where people just want to do more like networking or get to know me or catching up, it tends to be in the afternoon.
That makes a lot of sense. I also try to push as much as I can, where if I have the choice, I would try to have it in the afternoon, and morning hours are mostly for deep uninterrupted flow of
Exactly.
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into your expertise, right? So you have a lot of enthusiasm, passion for future work, flexible work, and you have experience working with big companies. You were in, I think, for more than 5 years in Mural. You were basically helping them embrace and embrace and work in flexible works, right? So in your experience, as we see, like, all the time what we hear in headlines or what we hear as trendy news is that there's this trend going on. Like, for example, during COVID we heard about, oh, now everyone's going to remote, right? Soon after that we heard, oh, now people are going in to do hybrid work. Or later they called, oh, now some companies like Zoom, Nike, some big companies are pulling moves like, hey, now you have to be in person, right? These are trendy moves, right? But if you think of how the sustainable progressive work style is, there's like, it's beyond the trends, right? So I would like to get your opinion on, like, where this is headed. Like, forget about the trends, where the future work is headed in your experience, as that's your expertise.
So I think the trends, like we can still look at them to kind of give us an idea of what may happen in the future. There is the return to office, so the RTO trend right now, where companies are asking employees to come back to the office because they feel they're more productive, and at the same time, employees are saying, well, I don't mind coming back to the office sometimes, but I don't want to be there all the time. So there are experiments going around with maybe coming back to the office 2 or 3 times a week, and making that mandatory. I think we're going to see more and more of that, where also, in order to be able to hire the right talent,
Mhm.
employers will have to be a bit more flexible. Although right now, seeing that, at least not only in tech, but also specifically in tech industries, which is the one which is the industry I work with the most, it's kind of to the advantage of the employers now, because there is it's a hard time to find jobs. So that means that they kind of have the upper hand for the time being. And so if that's the policy, that's the policy. And you, as an employee, as a job, how do you say that? Someone who's looking
Seeker.
for a job, solid job seeker. Thank you. Then you may, depending on your situation and how badly you need the job, you will just accept the policy that is. Like, I have ex-colleagues who are now going back to the office, even though at Mural we were
Mhm.
all remote, because that is just the reality of where they are, and the kind of jobs that they can find. But I think that in the future, hopefully, once the job market kind of stabilizes itself or things change, that employers are already thinking about not only how they can make hybrid work, but also how they
Mhm.
can redesign their physical spaces. So if you look at LinkedIn, for example, they're doing a lot of interesting things around redesigning the office space of their headquarters and other offices. Even I think lately in Tokyo they did that as well, where they're looking at,
Yeah.
like, how can we optimize this space to make it a space that is catering to different needs, different kinds of gatherings, different kind of collaboration styles, and not just have like the classic open office, and
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah. I would like to
So
add
yeah,
something there, like to ask
sure.
you more. Like, that's a super interesting topic because I think I was recently reading about Slack redesigning the same office thing, right? Like they were redesigning their office to be more flexible. And then I read about this point where they talk about when they were redesigning. First thing what they said is, "Hey, what's the purpose of the office when you're doing this?"
Right.
Like, so they are redesigning more of it only for specific meetings, and they got rid of, like, I think the, like, blocks where the directors had the specific rooms, and then much for networking and, like, for the team to come together. So they're totally revamping and redesigning, right?
Yeah, and I think, again, we're talking now about LinkedIn, for example, or Slack, or these are kind of the companies that are pioneering sometimes. Well, actually, I wouldn't say that they are the pioneers, but they're showing
Hmm.
trends in the tech industry. However, I'm also very, very aware, because I have friends who work in completely different industries, where everywhere else, kind of, more
Yeah.
traditional kind of jobs, it's that's not the reality. So I think there's also going to be in the future very much, traditional ways of working continuing, but maybe just a little bit more flexibility around. You can do home office today, but that doesn't mean that they are going to redesign their offices, right? If I
Yeah.
have friends, for example, who are lawyers, that's going to say probably the same. Or actually, well, lawyers is a completely different. They also have to go meet their clients in different places. But I think we do have to be careful about this trend. It's not for everyone. I also, however, think another trend, or another thing that will happen more, and is already happening now, is more company gatherings, like offsites, like retreats, because there's a real
Mhm.
need for that. So that could happen at the office, but that could also happen in other places, where they're trying to bring people together and creating that human connection in
Yeah.
person, in a special kind of location and experience.
Yeah. I actually have two questions to take from what you said there, but I have a question related to, you said these, trends and traditional companies, right? So when we, like, based on my understanding, when we look at that, like, usually, like, young and small companies tend to, be much open for experiment and be remote, hybrid, or whatever, the new ways are. And then when you look at old and big companies, the gesture or the how they see it is little different. They try to be much more in person, right? And what do you think is going on there? Like, what are the inputs that goes into, to see this pattern where young and, old companies behave little differently on that end?
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, if you're creating a company from scratch, basically you're starting anew, you can really create it any way you want, because there's just a blank page for you to create on. And especially if you're maybe of a younger generation. I mean, I'm a millennial, I guess, but there are, Gen Zs and all the others after. They may do things that are catering to whatever needs and desires and trends that they have, that their generation has. So it's, I think it could be a generational thing. It could be the fact that it's much easier to do that when you're starting with a blank page.
Yeah.
And then, I was working in a company that was maybe 5 years old when I joined. This was before Mural. They were a design company, and the founder was remote, and the other people were remote, and it just started remote, right? So it was
Mhm.
easier to do it. I think with more traditional companies, older companies, they've already invested a lot in real estate. They already have a system or a workflow that they think works the way it is. And maybe
Mhm.
it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't want to say it never works. But they've invested a lot of money, time, energy, capital, resources into whatever thing they have. And to make those changes, especially on a large scale, is a huge investment and is going to take a lot of time. And I think in terms of priorities, they also have to consider, like, is this a priority right now? And do we have the resources to do this? And in terms of transformation, because when you think of change management, it can look in many different ways. Getting people to work remote is just one of the many changes that they have to do, and maybe that's not their highest priority right now. So I don't think they're completely ignoring it. Some, yes, but I think some is just not something they can do quite easily, and maybe they're not familiar with the kind of more startup-y mindset of, like, well, just pilot something, test something, iterate, do it in small ways, and then improve on it later. I think some of
Yeah.
these bigger corporates is like, it has to be perfect right away, or also the way things get approved is much slower. There's a lot
Mhm.
more hierarchy. Things get lost, things get put on hold for at least 6 months, and then next thing you know, 10 years have passed.
The key thing I hear there is, like, there's certain level of expectation management. If you think of that, like startups, they tend to have low expectations. They just, or much more open minded, right? And then you said probably big companies might have an expectation where it have to work right off the bat, like, soon, the moment you embrace it, it should work, right?
Well,
But
they're
you
less
did.
agile. Yeah, they also don't have
Mhm.
that agile mindset.
Yeah, yeah. And also true, you also did say that it's not just you change the work style for it to work. Like there are other, like, a lot of elements that need to happen along with you. Just, hey, we're just going remote, or hey, we only come for office for one day. It's not like flipping a switch and make the announcement, right?
Yeah,
So what are
especially
the
from a
other?
legal perspective, I just
Yeah.
realized as well. For HR, there's a lot of legal things that need to be able to be
Hmm.
put into place for a bigger company that is hiring worldwide. And you also have to justify, like, why would we allow one region to go remote and not the other? And that may be of a legal thing as well, in terms
Mm.
of, can they hire people from everywhere? Can people work from home? And, like, what is the insurance policy like if they hurt themselves at home while working? That kind of stuff actually is something that has to be taken into consideration as
Yeah.
well.
And also, what do you think in terms of how the culture works? Like when they are in person, the culture could be like entirely different. How would you advise them in terms of how do you figure out the culture if someone needs to take step towards that?
Yeah, I mean, the culture is going to be there regardless, right? Because culture is, simply put, how people collaborate together, how they treat each other, how they make decisions. So that is already there.
Hmm.
I think it's more about, if there is a big change going to happen, like that kind of change happening, it's about having the mindset again, and the communication, the transparent communication, keeping people informed of, like, here's what's going to happen, here's what we want to happen. It's about creating a culture also of inclusivity, so you can ask opinions and inputs from different stakeholders, the stakeholders who are going to be impacted, right? So let's say
Hmm.
leadership makes a decision that everybody's going remote, but they have never even considered asking the employees that are going to be impacted, what do they think about that? And do
Yeah.
they want to be remote the whole time or not? Then already there's something missing in the culture in terms of the communication and the collaborative aspect, right? So I think to make that kind of change, those are the kind of things you can think about the culture, like communication, transparency, inclusivity, flexibility, right? Like, do you have a culture where people are also willing to try things out and experiment and maybe make mistakes? Or
Hmm.
is this a culture where we're only expecting people to be high performers the whole time? And therefore, if there is a transition of that kind, they still have to, their output still has to match the same kind of output as before, without realizing that it's definitely going to affect people's work
Yeah. Yeah.
and
True.
performance.
And you did mention about like taking the input from employees before the leaders make the decision, right? But with your experience, since I get a lot of people talk to you, especially leadership, and then I assume you talk to all the stakeholders, including the employees, right? So when you talk to, in general, like when you talk to employees, like what are like interesting concerns they have from an employee perspective?
Yeah, from the employee perspective, I mean, it really depends. There's not like every company is different in terms of what is top of mind for those
Yeah.
employees. And also depends what people bring me in for. So as a consultant, I may come in and help redesign onboarding. And then it will be very, tied to their feedback will be very tied to onboarding because that's what I'm asking them about.
Yeah.
But they may not be speaking to me about all the other, let's say, more political problems that happen in the company unless I ask about that, right? So
Hmm.
I can say that there is like a general thing happening all over, but I do think that one issue that I've seen coming up a lot is with all the changes that companies have gone through, especially since COVID and after that, things are moving at a faster and faster pace. Employees are expected to perform better and better and continue,
Hmm.
staying top of things. But when there are so many successive changes, one after the other, it does become very exhausting and tiring. I think there are more and
Hmm.
more people who are suffering from burnout, whether they call it burnout or not. The
Yeah.
symptoms are there. Even in my own personal network. And so I think that this is what I hear the most is just people feeling exhausted and also people not feeling very supported by their managers always. But I think they are also aware, especially for middle managers, that they're in a very tough spot because they are supposed to lead a team and be very be empowered to help that team, but at the same time they're getting very strong demands from the top of how they need to perform or the kind of KPIs or OKRs that
Mm.
they need to reach. And so it becomes this like kind of vicious cycle of, more demands, people feel more tired, managers trying to do the best that they can and feeling like they're squashed in the middle. And so I think that that's kind of what I'm hearing from employees is that it's just a very tiring time and people need a break from
Yeah.
the way things are done, right?
Yeah. And it's a great point that you mentioned about middle managers, because now from top they asked about performance, but since they are working with people, they have to have that empathy and then build that relationship, and they kind of probably already have the empathy since they are the ones who in the field, like working with the team, right? So now they are trying to be between, hey, how can I be in more human, and also to be put enough pressure or whatever, that the way the performance is measured. So they are like, as you mentioned, they are stuck in the middle where it's
Yeah.
people have a break on that. Yeah. Do
And
you
there's
have any
another issue.
suggestions?
Sorry, just
Yeah.
one more thing I wanted to say about the middle managers also is that management hasn't really been updated the way people should manage since in the last
Mm.
decades. And so it has been taught in the past and even currently for an in-person experience where people go from like 9 to 5 or whatever at the office. And however, now teams are distributed and the learning
Yes.
and development, let's say the training hasn't really, of course, there are trainings out there to help managers who are, teaching for, not teaching, sorry, but leading a distributed team, whether that's hybrid or fully
Yeah.
remote. But do they have the access to that kind of training?
Hmm.
Can they apply it? Will their leaders also sponsor that and support that? It's like a whole system that needs to change. It's not just like, okay, I, as a middle manager, or as a manager, I take a training and now I know how to do things. I also have to work with other managers who have to work the same way. And I feel like that is causing a lot of issues as well because these management styles and management
That's
frameworks or
such a
whatever you
great
want to call
point.
them is not,
Yeah.
they're not updated.
I also like talk a lot about this, is like where how the transformation happened is we have translated most of the things that were in person, and then we just translated into digital version or whatever that was there.
Yeah.
We haven't really put enough like thought or innovation or experimentation to make sure, hey, what if what if we have to do this little different from in person? Like there hasn't been much thought put into this. It's a great point that you mentioned, and then I love that. Yeah. Do you think some of that reason has to be because of COVID, where all of a sudden everyone was forced to go into COVID, people just translated whatever they had in person to remote? You think that's what happened?
I think, yeah, it went mainstream, right? It
Hmm.
went global. So before COVID, when I told people I worked remotely, most of the people around me, they didn't either understand how that could even possibly work, or
Mhm.
they didn't believe it could work,
Can I
or
ask
they
you
were
what kind
skeptical.
of jobs that you were doing when you said you were working back then?
Yeah, so I was a designer, more like doing UX design
Mhm.
or user research at first, and then I was doing facilitation, and then I was also doing HR roles and
Mm.
culture, company culture roles. So some of these things you can do remote, but it was more about also having this idea that being at home all day, or first of all, I wasn't home all day. I was traveling as a digital nomad. I was
Mhm.
going to co-workings. I was sometimes going to friends' houses who were also like freelancers, and we would work together. So it was a mix of things. So I think that before COVID, people didn't even have an understanding of what remote work meant. And even now, I don't think they have a full understanding, because for them,
They had a
remote work
different
during COVID,
experience of like working from
yes,
home as like a remote experience.
well, it was very isolating at a time in history when everything was extremely
Everywhere it's shut
there's a
down
lot of tension
basically.
or a lot of fear or anxiety. So working from home in those conditions where you can't even leave the house and your whole family is at home, maybe, or all your housemates are at home, it just means that they didn't have the same experience. But I do think that it it helped, COVID helped remote work go mainstream,
Yeah.
but too fast, right? It scaled too quickly and not in the best way. So it gave people also like a false understanding of what remote work means.
Mm.
And I know so many people were like, oh, I still hate remote work. Like I tried it, I had to do it. But I'm so happy I'm back at the office now because I really didn't like it. And it's like, you don't get it. Like that's not, working from
Yeah.
home is not the only way to work
That's
remotely.
true. Remote work is not what we saw during COVID. That has to be renamed as like totally. I tend to call it as work from home because you couldn't do anything other than staying at home and doing things.
True.
But also like remote work is also about flexible work, and there is this concept of timeless work, right? Would you like to give us a little further on like flexible work and timeless work, and how it works different from work from home and
Yeah,
other
I
stuff?
mean, I personally don't use timeless work so much as a terminology. I
Hmm.
know maybe the word is out there, but I think when it comes to flexible work, it's about being able to also maybe choose like what is right for you that day or in that period of time, and depending on the project you're doing, depending on your personal needs. So flexible work to me could mean like you
Yeah.
could be working from home, you could be going somewhere else to co-working, you could work in the office. You could travel and work and rent an Airbnb and work from somewhere else for like a week if that's something that helps you. And also it's about choosing maybe your own working hours, or maybe having a company policy where the important thing is the are the outcomes and not so much the times, the
Yeah.
hours that you put into. So it's not about tracking time. It's really about what are you doing with that time, and can you reach the goals that the team has agreed on. So I see flexible work in that way. And I think that, yeah, it's different from just saying working from home and I have a home office and like I'm working from home today. This is my home office. This is not a fake background, but it's not, even for me, it gets tiring, right? Like I need that flexibility and be able to go to co-working sometimes just to kind of change it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so true. And also in your experience, what are some of the common scapegoats that you hear?
I think so. What I've noticed in articles, and this is maybe another trend, and again, some articles will say remote work is helping people be more productive, and another article will say the complete opposite. But
Mhm.
productivity comes up a lot. So it's not really a scapegoat, but it's more about saying, well, flexible work or remote work doesn't work because we are not as productive as we should be. And this usually tends to be said by a C-level
Mhm.
person in a company who wants people to who wants the employees to come back to
Come
the
back to.
office.
Yeah.
So that's the main thing I've heard. But I've also heard things around time zones.
Hmm.
Although that, in my opinion, would be a problem regardless of whether you are in the office or working from home, because if you are
Yeah.
collaborating with teammates across the world, then those time zones will not change depending on your location unless you travel to that person, like you move to that country. So of course, if it's in terms of like policies letting people travel while they work, there
Hmm.
may be some companies saying, yeah, we experimented with that, but the time zone was an issue when all our colleagues were like on in one time zone, and we had one person traveling being like 6 hours ahead or behind. So time zone sometimes, I mean, it comes up often as an issue. Again, I don't think when it comes to scapegoats, I don't think it's just blaming the fingers on the specific team or person. It's more about
Mhm.
the results.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something I've noticed as well. If you already have a flowed way of measuring productivity or process when you were in person, it wouldn't really help even if you go remote, because the way you measure is totally wrong. Like in generally how it says is, if someone's slacking at office, they would obviously slack at
Sure.
remote as well, and other way around
Yeah.
as well, right? So how do you say, like, specifically, is there any insight or any direction that you would help for a team that is doing remote in terms of performance measurement, and how they can see to optimize that? I've recently observed this in our team as well, so like, can you be give us a little more insight into that?
I think when it comes to measuring performance, I mean, there are different ways to do this. What I've noticed is many companies don't do it well, included the ones sometimes where or they don't do it consistently. So it's not
Hmm.
just about doing it well. It's a number of things. It could be one, they don't have a a specific or a very clear way of measuring performance. Like it could vary from department to department, for example, right?
Yeah.
Two, they may be measuring that performance, but they're not doing it consistently, or yeah, it's or some members of the team are, others aren't, and that sometimes is a problem of not having defined the goal well enough.
Hmm.
Or it's for example, we use OKRs a lot in my past teams, and it was only, I think, after actually I've been, and I'm talking about across companies, I think it was only in my last year or so where I finally learned how to phrase OKRs properly, because we had also somebody come in and really help us into understand, and we had done workshops around OKRs before, but it's just like it can be really hard to set goals the right way,
Yeah.
to phrase them the right way, and also depending on, if you're in sales, it can be very quantitative, but if you're in culture like I was, or in the more people related things, it's sometimes harder because a lot of in my opinion, a lot of the measurements are more qualitative, and it's harder to do that, to phrase it and make it fit into an OKR if you don't have a little bit of help and thinking around it. So yeah, so I said
Yeah.
not phrasing them correctly is an issue, because then you think you're not performing well, but in reality you didn't set the right goal. And then I think also what matters very much in terms of performance is having a feedback cycle, like having a way of
Hmm.
communicating with not just with your manager, but with your peers, and having it be a feedback that is, going both ways. We talk about 360 feedback and other feedback, but I've also facilitated sessions where I ask every team member to give feedback to every other team member in a safe space, but like all together
Yeah.
in the same room, whether that's a virtual room or a physical room, and that is a whole other type of feedback, and that also
Yeah.
helps you understand your performance better. So when we do performance reviews, it's not just about looking, in my opinion, at did you reach your goal or not, because oftentimes you won't, and that's not only your fault, because there are so many external factors that can impact it, but also like how are you performing with your team? Are you actually a high performing team together? Do you collaborate well? And what are the systems that are put in place for your team to evaluate that in a very not necessarily easy way, but
Yeah.
because sometimes these conversations are hard, but like, do you have a way of doing that openly in a way that you trust each other's feedback and also want it, so that you can
True.
continue improving?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point about bringing in that feedback among each other, instead of just one on one with the manager as a feedback, where only the manager gives the feedback, and there's I love that. I love that. And yeah, Laila, in your opinion, let's say, like, now Gen Z is taking over, they are coming into workspace, and let's say most of them would love to work in remote or hybrid new work styles, right? One thing that we have seen is, with I mean, obviously, compared to the in-person, new work styles have less of networking opportunities for you to socialize, since you're not going into office. But what would you give them as an advice for them to social networking life beyond their friends? I would love to hear, like, what you have to say for them.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, because first of all, what I've been reading in again in reports and articles is that Gen Zs are, or Gen Zers, however we want to call them, they have a different need than millennials. So millennials
Mhm.
started working when work was still at the office. And so we
Yeah.
were fed up with that and we wanted to get out of the office. But a lot of Gen Z is also people who maybe graduated from university or college during COVID and were already feeling very isolated during their last years of study. They didn't like that, and they felt too isolated, and they would rather go to the office. At least that's what I've been reading, right? Like many of
Mhm,
them
mhm.
would rather be in the office,
Yeah.
also because for them they're beginning their career. So like it was easy for me to, after 10 or more years of working, say, okay, I'm ready to like do this
Yeah.
differently, right? Because I had
Exactly.
spent enough time with my managers and my team and my mentors and whoever, people who were teaching me about how to do the work that I had to do.
Yeah.
But if you start remotely, I don't really recommend that either
Hmm.
to anyone, because I think it's important to go to a place. I think the whole concept of the office can be reinvented, but let's call it the office for now.
Yeah.
But or it could be like some kind of campus, like a working kind of campus, without referring to Facebook or Apple or these kind of campuses. But like
Hmm.
having a place where people go, or maybe they go occasionally, or in the mornings they go there and then they go home, so they can also learn how to work independently. Like I think it will be interesting to see what Gen Z comes up with, if anything at all. And to answer your question, I forgot the rest of the question actually, but
Yeah,
it
my
was,
question is, what would be your suggestion for them to level up their
yeah,
networking opportunities beyond these limitations? Because now all you have is, in professional setting,
yeah,
maximum all you have is few calls with your managers, probably if you're coming into office once a week or twice a week. That's a limited access
yeah,
for you to, because when you're young you want to like observe the world, talk to other people,
yeah,
learn from them, and like you have to have that, as you said, you learn that in first 10 years of your career, which helps you
mm-hmm.
to develop that thick skin to understand how the norms work, and to easily talk to people, and get a flow with them. So that has to be, you can't read that and take it, like it has to
Yeah.
be you go in and practice, right? So how do you suggest them level up their game in that areas?
Yeah, so I mean, events will continue happening, right? Whether that's meetups or
Hmm.
conferences or some kind of events in their local region. I would say try to find out as much as possible, like what are the events happening that you're interested in, and go to them. And
Yeah.
these don't necessarily have to be related to your job; they can just be related to things that you are
True.
interested in, because you never know, like who you might meet at some completely kind of different event, different industry thing. As long as it interests you and you're going there for a purpose,
Yeah.
you go there with intention, you can always learn interesting things, which might help you in your career.
Hmm.
Um, and so I would say, find out what those events are. And likewise, I hear the word community come up more and more.
Hmm.
Sometimes in a good way, sometimes not, because now it's like every company wants to build a community for their customers, and it's not always done with the intention of really caring about that community. But I think there
Yeah.
are different types of communities, whether those are online, whether those are in person. I think balance is everything.
Yeah. One thing
So
I
having
love
a good
about
mix.
community you mentioned is co-working spaces, communities built around that. I find
Yeah,
them really helpful for you to network, which
yeah,
I find it interesting, because you're meeting people who are not really your work colleagues as well. People from
exactly.
different departments, designers,
Yeah,
developers, you call it. So yeah,
yeah.
that's something I've been saying people, but it's good to hear that you suggest like networking events, or in general as events, as a way to go as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have we've come to the end of the discussion. One question I have for you is, now work has changed a lot in 15 years. A new equation, a variable has come into the equation, is AI. Now algorithms and machines are going to work with me, or probably would be working when we were sleeping as well, right? So how do you think the work is going to change in future with AI is coming into work? AI is basically coming into workforce, right? So how do you see that going forward?
Yeah, so I was just at a workshop this morning about how to build your AI employee
Mhm.
by Dan Van Rosen. I think that's his last name, but definitely want to double check that. So I think that for like I signed up because I know that AI is moving fast and I want to stay on top of things and learn how to use AI to maximize how I use AI. I already use it very frequently,
Yeah.
but I want to learn different ways of using it. And so I think that is something that's so one of the things that was seen in this was explained during this workshop. I think it was a report by Asana or another report, but basically more and more people are learning how to use AI. But in the last 6 months, like 47% of employees in the companies that were interviewed started learning more about AI. And I think this is just going to happen even more, like
Yeah.
more quickly. And okay, once you learn about it, it's like, how are you going to use it and apply it? So I think, for example, the workshop that I joined today was about building your own AI assistant and
I
having
find it
different
really
kinds of
interesting,
assistants.
like a curious way of AI employee building. Yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, and even like for me, it was the first time I had heard about AI assistants, but
Mhm.
I hadn't thought about AI employees, and so he was facilitating it also for leaders. It's targeted like company leaders and understanding that they can consider AI as an extension of their team rather
Mm,
than just a software. It's really about having additional employees
yeah.
in your team, and then
I'm
of
going to
course there's
quickly
also the
interrupt there
issue.
to add one more into that, right? So the moment you said they want AI to think as a team member, right? Do you
Yeah.
think AI is much more favorable to, flexible work because it's not compound for time than in person? So like now you have a like a much more favorable person who is, much more favorable for a remote work style, or like a flex. Do you think so?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think yes. I mean, I think it does, in a way, allow for maybe even leaders to understand. Well, this AI assistant is remote or is online, and so in a way, it's collaborating with something
Yeah, it's
that is
basically
remote, and
timeless,
maybe
as we
yeah.
discussed earlier as well. It's timeless, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think essentially, I mean, there will be more training and more companies will have to get on board of AI. And this is really like a survival thing. I mean, the getting onto the remote bandwagon was one thing, but the AI thing, I think that they're feeling even more left behind much faster.
True.
So I think there's just going to be more opportunities, more learning opportunities for all these companies. But also, it's going to be a huge phase of experimentation because nobody really has the answers yet. So it's not like it's right or wrong. It's about figuring out what are the limits, what can you use it for, where does data security and all that kind of stuff come into question, what are the solutions for those kind of challenges, how can you actually control even like what AI people use and like how much work they're doing versus how much AI is doing. So I think there's going to be a whole set of new challenges as well that I personally can't predict all of them at all, but like it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it would be super interesting to see how companies embrace that, AI employee, probably employees as their team members. And my assumption is most likely like the people who are already experimenting, like open to experiment, much more agile, are gonna, lead the way of experimenting and, like winning that,
Yeah, for
new way
sure.
way of doing it. And yeah, I think it was brilliant talking to you. Before we end, I want to ask you, since you work with remote, like you consult, you help people, right? If there's anyone who's listening to the show, if they want to work with you, I would just like you to say, how you work with companies, or anything that you think is good enough for them to understand how you work, and how, whatever that is, is required. Please share it before
Yeah.
we end this.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And thank you, Rifat, for having me. So, yeah, I help companies improve their team collaboration and their company culture, and also their employee experience. So I look at, these kind of three things, collaboration being a part of culture as well. And there are a number of ways that I could do that. I can work directly with company leaders who want to put a more kind of strategic vision into what kind of culture they want to build, the values and all of that. I can work directly with HR, specifically around employee experience. And sometimes I work also with managers and HR and anybody else who is involved to organize things, for example, like company retreats or team
Mm.
offsites.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of what I do.
Yeah, so if anyone's interested, you should reach out to Laila on probably LinkedIn. That's how I reached out to her, and I'm super happy that you said yes for this recording.
Thank
And
you.
really thankful that you said yes, and thanks a lot for giving your time for the show and sharing your insights.
Thank you so much. And yes, I do also have a website, so you can find me on LinkedIn, but you can also find me on lailavon.com.
There you go. I'll let the link below in the
Thank you.
description as well.